Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here in sunny Orlando, Florida, where we're covering the Air Force Association's 34th Annual Air Warfare Symposium, one of the leading gatherings of Air Force leaders and industry executives. Our coverage here is sponsored by Leonardo DRS, and we're honored to have with us the commander of the United States Air Force Air Combat Command, General Mike Mobile Holmes. Sir, thanks very much for talking to us.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here with you, Vago.
So let's start. There's been a budget infusion. When we spoke at AFA last year, some of the taps were starting to flow. You've got a little bit of extra money. Where are you spending that in order to improve readiness of the command, which you've talked, one of the top priorities is to get that readiness footing back up?
So one of the places we're putting quite a bit of that money is into munitions to buy back the stocks that have been used over 25 years of continuous war in the Middle East. And that's one of the primary contributions it will make to getting our readiness back. We'll fully fund training as far as we can go with it. We'll get into our spares accounts, but probably the other biggest part will be the people. So this budget buys another 4,700 people to increase our end strength. A year ago when I was talking to you, we were short about 4,000 maintainers across the Air Force. This year we're short 400 because of the end strength that we brought back. So we still have to train those young maintainers from being what we call 3 levels to being 5 levels so they can work on the airplane for themselves. We'll do work on that this year, and then in the later years of this budget, we'll need to add additional money in flying hours and training opportunities.
Pilots has also been a problem across the Air Force for many years. We're looking at a generational shift now in retirement from the commercial sector, so there's hot demand. A lot of folks want to get out. There are a whole bunch of factors on it. Air Force has been trying to wrap their arms around it. I know you and the Chief have been working on that along with the Secretary. Talk to us a little bit about where you are in terms of addressing this kind of really long-term challenge.
So we're trying to get at it on all the fronts and all the places you would expect us to do. So we're going after what can we do to try to align our financial incentives with the industry. I'll never compete with that, but what can I do? What steps can I take to get closer to it? The next thing that we're doing is looking at the irritants. Every generation has theirs. My generation had ours. This generation has their own. Part of that is the people that we took out of squadrons, and when we buy back another 4,700 people, we're buying back logistics people, we're buying back administrative people, we're buying back finance people, we're buying back people to do more of those additional duties that pilots have had to pick up during that time frame. The other big thing that we're going to get after is talking to our guys about why they're here and why we need them. Look, ultimately, the thing I can offer is a meaningful career and a meaningful life to guys to commit their life and service as part of a community to their nation. I can't pay them what the airlines pay, but I can make sure that it's meaningful service and it's something they can feel good about doing. And then we're going to produce. We're going to increase the production in UPT, we're going to increase the production in our flying training units, and we're going to add more pilots to try to buy back the shortage that we have.
And you got cooler airplanes, so at least you got that going for you.
Well, we do have good airplanes coming out. I have a son that just finished pilot training and is in fighter training now. And so I see that through his eyes, and I see what the issues are, and it's still pretty cool. It's still pretty cool to come off the street, to go through Air Force pilot training, to jump into an F-16 and go strap that airplane on that only has one seat in it and is designed for only one purpose, which is to serve your country in. And it's still a pretty cool career.
It is. It's extraordinary, even for those of us who have the pleasure and honor of covering it. The theme of this conference is innovation. In fact, we've got the Spark Tank finalist session that's about to start here in a little bit. I know something as innovation has been an issue that everybody's been talking about. It's a years-long endeavor. The last administration focused on it. Secretary Mattis is also focused on it. So is Secretary Wilson, and General Goldfein obviously has been focused on it, and so have you. Talk to us a little bit about how you're harnessing innovation within ACC in your command, from the airmen from the lowest level on up, in terms of filtering and getting, sort of filtering these ideas and then grabbing onto the best one.
So the place across the Air Force that I would say that's leading the way in innovation is in 25th Air Force, and it's in our distributed common ground system infrastructure, the 480th Intel Wing, the 70th Intel Wing, and the 363rd Targeting Wing. They're really brilliant young airmen. They're digital natives. They're finding new ways to do the things that we need them to do, to take in a lot of data and process it and turn it out as information. They write their own code. They come up with their new ideas. So we provided them with innovation centers where they have resources and tools, and we give them time to execute new ideas. But what it really comes down to, and what we've really got to do, it's about trust. So as the 858 on the air staff, I took some of these innovation opportunities and tools and laid them out there and said, okay, get started innovating. and I was shocked 6 months later when nobody had, and it was because they didn't believe me. They didn't believe that if they brought forward a new idea, I would take it. They didn't believe that it wouldn't get them in trouble with their supervisor if they brought a new idea that he hadn't thought of. And so across Air Combat Command, we want to take that same environment that exists in the 480th and the Distributed Common Ground System enterprise and build the trust with our airmen that says, we will listen to you, we want your ideas, and instead of saying, why should we do it, we need to approach it with, why shouldn't we do it? And that's the next step that we'll work on, and you'll see some of that today.
Budgets. There is a little bit more money. There's an expectation. There is going to be more money this year. There's an expectation that there's a small funding window. The hope is that it lasts a lot longer, but it may be very short. And you and I have talked about the fact that there will have to be prioritization within this. There are folks who are looking at the Air Force budget and are concerned that the new aircraft rate, you've said you need 150, has only gone from 42 to 48 for the F-35. And then there is talk about spending even more money on the fourth generation force to try to modernize it, which some folks are saying is a big mistake. How are you prioritizing this, you know, to make sure that this works as well as it can, given that your up-funding window could be a very brief one?
Yep. So I need, as a minimum, the 55 fighter squadrons that we have. As we add some F-35 in Alaska and in the United Kingdom, we'll grow slightly above that. So I can't go any smaller than what I have, and that means that every fighter and every fighter squadron I have has to be useful. So since I can only replace them at 50 a year with the F-35, or even if I could get to 100 a year, then it's still a 20-year replacement. I have to spend money on those legacy airplanes because I can't afford to keep them if they're not useful. So we'll balance that as we go forward. We'll balance acquiring new airplanes with the money it takes to keep the old ones useful. There are some decisions we need to make in the next couple of years about of our legacy airplanes, what we'll retire and when. And that'll help us to decide when to stop investing in some of those platforms. But it's going to depend on the budget level that we get as we go forward. It's going to depend on how well we do at driving down both the acquisition costs and the operating costs of the F-35 and how much room that makes in our budget.
Do you think you'll ever be in a position, do you think you're ever going to get to that high enough rate, whether it's 150 or 100, or do you think you're going to be struggling at around that 50 level to replace these aircraft? And if so, do you think you'll be forced to buy new fourth generation, which the chief has said he doesn't want to do, and you've talked a little bit about that as well? Do you think you'll be pushed into a position where you may have to be buying new 15s, new 16s in order to try to make this work? Or is it going to be block retirements and taking some risk to accelerate the new jets?
So if you do that, if you buy new legacy airplanes, it won't really be about money because they cost kind of the same as an F-35 does coming off the line. So what it's really about is do you want to have more than one production line open? So you can replace airplanes if you lose them, and it's about how do you work forward with Lockheed Martin and the consortium of people that build the F-35 to make sure that we deliver both the airplane and all the other things that it takes to make it an effective weapon system. So the flight planning system software, the mission data files, the Alice that connects and works it into the logistics system, and all the 8 elements, bringing those all along online. We want to increase the buy rate, but we want to increase the buy rate when all those things are being delivered at the same time. And so there's a trade-off, and how can we work the system? How can we keep pressure on delivering all those things? When is the right time to increase the buy rate? But if we shift to another airplane and buy some of those, particularly if it's F-15s or F-16s, the cost is not significantly different to acquire them. There's some cost issues on the operating cost, right? So on the O&M in the future, if you could make the case that you're going to have something cheaper to operate, then it's where can you use it and when will it be useful?
But largely your preference is buy 35s faster.
Yep, buy 35s faster. Think about what comes after that because the F-35 is a 20-year-old design already. The airplanes that are coming off the line now are good airplanes. The guys at Hill like them. They like the way they work. They're very effective at the things that they were designed to do. It's been 20 years since we designed the airplane, so there are other things that we needed to do, and we're going to keep modernizing the airplane as we buy them and buy them incrementally better. At the peak, we bought F-16s at 180 a year. We were buying 180 F-16s a year, replacing 6 or 7 squadrons in the Air Force every year. I need to get to 100 a year. I'm going to continue to advocate for that. But look, it has to fit into the Air Force budget, and there are competing demands in recapitalizing the nuclear enterprise, making sure that we can defend and use our space assets in a contested environment, keeping our mobility engine going, thinking about how the Air Force is going to operate in its ISR role and in electronic combat and in cyber. And so we're going to continue to balance that within the budget limits that we have.
You've been working on the penetrating counter-air problem for a while. As you mentioned, folks, it's amazing to think that the F-35 is actually not that, it may be new when it gets fielded to that unit.
Well, it's a great airplane.
It's a great airplane, but was designed at a time when the threat profile was different. Now we want range, payload, where we want payload, range, stealth, and a whole bunch of other factors. As you look at penetrating counter-air, insofar as you can discuss it, that was the number one question. When I said I'm talking to you, everybody was like, what the heck is it, including some people who I think are playing in that space. What is it? Is it a family of systems? Is it an aircraft? What are you envisioning there as you look at the kind of challenges that the Air Force is going to have to face in another decade and a half? What time frame does this thing have to debut in?
So no matter what we do, we're committed to maintaining the Air Force's ability to control and exploit the air and space. That's our job for the Joint Force, and we need to make sure we're able to do that. So in our Air Superiority 2030 program, we're committed to putting the resources to make sure that we can do that. No matter how we do it, we're going to have to improve our ability to have multi-domain awareness, ISR. We're going to have advanced battle management to take that reams of data, turn it into information, and help decision makers position a force in the right place at the right time. And we're going to have the comms that make that possible. Beyond that, where I'm in competition with peer adversaries, and I don't really want to talk about exactly what I'm going to do, but I'm funding the efforts to give us decisions as we can go forward in the future. I'm happy with the funding that we're able to get for the program, and we're going to work hard to make sure that we can always fulfill our responsibility to the Joint Force to control and exploit the air on their behalf.
Do you have a date when you want this capability?
I'd like to have it yesterday if I could, but I'm limited by both physics and by the acquisition process. So sooner is better, but I also want to be able to have some doubt in my adversaries' minds about when I'm going to deliver it. So I'm not really going to talk about that either.
And I can appreciate that as much as I want to push you on it. I have other questions I want to ask you. Let me ask you about lessons from Syria. Very contested environment. We were in Dubai. We talked to an F-15E crew that talked about the very dynamic, complex environment. We've also talked to folks who are from the E3 community about some of the challenges and battle management issues and challenges there. Talk to us about Syria. Talk to us about the S-400 and the dangers that poses. One of the most potent systems in the world that really is kind of game-changing in its capability. And also, for example, the Chinese. I mean, the J-20 is a big aircraft that's designed to carry a very big missile that's going to get shot against some of our higher value assets to hold those systems at risk at range. Talk to us about how the combination of these sorts of air threats may drive us to the combination of all this, how is it changing how we fundamentally think about the problem? And will it change and lead us to very different novel solutions to these as opposed to what we have typically expected, which is plane for plane replacement, for example?
There's a lot in that question there.
There is.
Yeah, there's a lot in that question there. So our adversaries have watched closely what we've done, and we've lived for 25 years on an air advantage that we purchased during the Reagan era. We spent an extra $8 billion or so a year for about 10 years on the TAC Air enterprise between the Air Force and the Navy, and it bought us an advantage that really enabled the Joint Force across the world. If you want to say where is the high point of that advantage, you could talk about Desert Storm. I really think it's more the second invasion of Iraq. We continue to get better since then, but the gap between what we can do and what our enemies, that was probably the high point of our relative advantage to exploit the air against an adversary. We could do whatever we wanted. We could help the Joint Force in every way we needed. As that gap closes, it's about systems like the S-400 and about the J-20 and learning to deal with defeating them in new ways. The Syria problem is about those threats, but it's also about how tightly they're all pushed in there together. So because of Russia's interests and America's interests, Iran's interests, Syria's interests, our teammates that we're fighting alongside of various different coalition ground forces and everybody fighting in that very small space, then it makes it really hard to know who is who. So we're not squared off against Russia in an air war. We're not really squared off against Iran in an air war. We're squared off against the people, against ISIS inside that space where Russia and Iran and Syria are also operating. And so our guys are operating with maybe Russians on top of them, maybe within the range of a Russian system. Meanwhile, the Syrians are using a similar system that it's hard to tell the difference in. So it's very complicated, it's very complex, and part of that is everybody operating in that same space. It'd be really different if we were operating against Russia, you know, or against Iran. We're operating in the same space where they're operating to defeat ISIL. And so our crews have to work through it. They have to have a real strong understanding of the rules of engagement and what their authorities are. They have to have authority delegated down to them to act within those authorities. And we're working on doing all those things so that they're not sitting on their hands or that they're not stuck trying to decide what our nation wants them to do in that really complex environment.
Are we thinking as differently about these problems as you'd like? Are we being as creative to impose costs on our adversaries as they're trying to impose costs on us?
So what I would say about that is that in a lot of ways our adversaries are not constrained by the respect for human liberty, you know, that we have and our expectations as a nation. So in a lot of ways they're bringing whole of government efforts to this battlefield that our nation hasn't thought its way through yet. We are not comfortable as a nation with having the government inside our network, inside our email, and certainly not with the military having that capability. As an autocratic nation, they don't really care if their people are comfortable with it. They can take those steps, and so they have more ability to use those tools. I don't want that to be an excuse, though. Publicly available information, the different authorities that our coalition guys bring, look, we are going to continue to work through these, and we're going to fight through these things as a nation, and we have a lot of capabilities there, too. So ultimately, we're winning in the fight that we're there. The Air Force with the coalition ground forces and with the, you know, the help of the advise and assist have pretty much eliminated large formations of ISIS and ISIL from Iraq. We met our goal there. It's been a success. There are still pockets in there. We continue to fight alongside the government of Iraq and its forces as they clean those out. But we're able to accomplish our goals in that very tight airspace with very complex threats. And we'll accomplish our goals as they're reset then as we go from there.
Let me take you to command and control. You have talked about command and control. The chief, it's one of his priorities is the multi-domain battle management command and control system to get more out of the assets that we have in the future. The question is whether or not any of these systems are as connective with your sister services as they need to be ultimately. What are some of the things, you know, you were at the Brookings Institution and you were talking about how closely you're working with the Army in terms of, you know, sort of a new generation air-land battle as the PACAF has worked in the Pacific to create sort of the air-sea battle. Army obviously is playing in that, so I should say that it's a sort of a, not just, you know, each one of the individual services, but talk to us a little bit about whether or not you have the degree of connectivity you need between the services, between you, the Army, and the Navy, but also, you know, what you're doing with your sister services to come up with new battle concepts, given we're dealing with very adaptive, very successful, very sophisticated peer competitors.
So I think we are working closely together to try to figure this out. And, you know, as we talked about the last time we talked, I think a lot of what happens in the maritime environment is going to be worked out between the services and the PACOM AOR. How do we find solutions to work together? I think that because the continental nature of a conflict in Europe, that we'll work a lot of our issues out with the Army in that kind of scenario as we work through it, like we're doing in multi-domain battle, working with them. Ultimately, we think we're going to have to bring multi-domain capabilities together. We're going to have converged solutions where the components trust each other to be able to operate under that intent without lengthy boards and discussions, and be able to operate fast and drive a tempo that forces the enemy to react to us, which makes it hard for them to use the other tools that we talked about and have a set campaign to use it against us. We absolutely have to be able to communicate with each other. We have to do it under stress and not just in a peacetime environment. So the enemy's going to be doing everything they can to keep us from communicating with each other, which means we'll also have to be able to fight when we can't always communicate with each other. So there's a difference in that maritime environment where you can keep some distance from the threats and it gives you some more communications options. In that really dense European environment where people bring a lot of sophisticated SIGINT and EW tools, it's a tough environment, and we're going to have to fight on intent. We're going to have to fight knowing what the our partners expect us to do, and we're going to have to trust each other to operate that way.
I know that I'm getting the hook, but there's one thing I've got to ask you, which is the Joint STARS decision. You telegraphed that earlier last year. You made it clear that everybody knew that there was a change in direction. Talk to us a little bit about what the vision for the future is. You're saying, hey, let's keep the existing platform, let's freshen it, but then let's take a much more holistic look. Talk to us about what this entire network approach to this particular challenge that you're looking at.
So I think the vision for the future is, what if instead of a 60-degree swath out to 200 miles from a limited number of JSTARS, what if we could provide that picture all over the world all the time? What would that do for the warfighter in contested environments, but also what would it do for the warfighter or law enforcement in uncontested environments where they can't compete to get that limited number of resources? So the vision is, how can we build this picture and expand our knowledge and bring the information back so that we can see wherever we need to see, whenever we need to see it, regardless of the weather and regardless of the circumstances. That's the vision. We think we know how to do that. The technology is not that hard. The problem is walking through the budget to be able to fund that a year at a time and make the transition from where we are to where we are now. And that's what, if there are questions about our approach, that's what we have to work through with people, is how will we get from a decision, if Congress decides not to recap the JSTARS, to this vision of being able to do it 24/7 all over the world and be able to provide it both in contested and highly contested environments, but also to have global coverage outside of that. That's where we want to get to, and that's what we're working through.
General Mike Mobile Holmes, Commander of the United States Air Force's Air Combat Command. Sir, thanks very much. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks. Good to see you. Thank you.